Hello guys, this is Jay and I'm here in Thailand on the Koh Samui Islands. Today we're gonna talk about the Red Komodo and Blackmagic Cinema Pocket 4K. We're gonna have some footages side by side and I will tell you why Red RAW is so different comparing to the Blackmagic. Also today we're gonna talk about the cameras in use and how much time it takes to set each unit and prepare for the shoot. As you probably know, the Red ISO is really different to any other ISO on different cameras, and Blackmagic is also completely different with that, and this is the main difference I think between these cameras. So the Blackmagic ISO is actually baking the file with the ISO of the camera, is attaching to the file, attaching to the raw file. So on the post-production you're able to switch the ISO, but you still have some limitations. So when we select ISO on the Blackmagic and this ISO is under 1250, we will be limited while we select ISO on the post-production. The same thing when you choose your ISO over 1250, you will be limited to go under that value. So in general, while you make your shoot on BM, you need to remember about that values. Okay guys, let's jump to the Blackmagic settings and let's build our exposure here. First thing we're gonna do, we need to choose our 180-degree shutter angle. This is like must-have on all the cameras. This is the only value that you need to remember about. 180 is a golden standard for starting your shoot, you know, to have a proper shutter speed and shutter angle. So, but for me, it's actually doesn't matter what shutter angle I have to use, because most of the time I shoot in the slow motion and it's not that visible according to the normal speed of 24 FPS. So let's start our exposure. We're gonna turn on the false color here. As you can see here, we have a lot of overexposed areas. First of all, we're gonna wide open our lens and we have more overexposed areas here. Our ISO now is 100, shutter speed and shutter angle is on the correct position. So we're gonna spin our ND filter until we're gonna close our highlights. So our highlights has disappeared and the only thing we have here is underexposure. So to fix that, we're gonna jump to the ISO and boost it up to that 400 or even 500 or even 640. So the native ISO on the Blackmagic is 400, and as you know, it has a dual ISO. So if you're gonna increase your ISO until 1000 on the post-production, you will be able to go from 100 to 1000, and if you're gonna jump over 1000, you're gonna have a second ISO of the Blackmagic and you're limited from 1250 to 6400, and this is the second value on the Blackmagic. So anyway, we're gonna keep our 640. Let's see what we have. Let's turn on the focus speaking, and now we have our exposure correct. This is the perfect exposure on the Blackmagic. So for me, it takes more time to set Blackmagic because it's a lot of manipulation with the ISO and the shutter speed and also the lens itself. But it's so different for Red, and here where the things start to be more interesting. Speaking simple, every ISO in the Red is a native ISO because its ISO actually doesn't affect into the file itself. So when you shoot the image, you need only to control aperture and the shutter speed. For those who wants to protect their highlights and the shadows while they shoot, the Red technician recommends to stick with the 800 ISO to have a good starting point to be able to control your highlights and the shadows. Okay guys, let's go ahead and do the exposure on our Red Komodo, and first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna jump to our assistant, which is the exposure mode. And as you can see here, we have our area here overexposed. So if you're gonna jump to the ISO, and when you spin your ISO, it doesn't really affect on the image itself, on the exposure, you know. So with the ISO, you're actually really safe with the Red. You're not able to screw the image. The only thing which is really affect on the exposure here is the shutter angle. And as a golden rule is 180. I'm gonna keep this value here. We're going to spin our ND filter just when our highlights gonna disappear. we're gonna jump to the ISO. We're gonna stick to 800, which is a red recommended starting point ISO. We're gonna wide open our lens, by the way. It's still overexposed, so we're gonna spin a bit our ND filter right over here. But we still have a little bit of black bar here. Now it seems to be right. Okay, so let's turn off our exposure mode. And over here we see what we have. And we see we have everything constant. We don't have anything underexposed and overexposed. The only two things I would say you need to remember about while you're shooting on the red Komodo, you need to remember about your shutter angle, which has to be 180 all the time, and your aperture. This is only two things that can screw your image or make it better. So the red technician also said that when you're using 3200 ISO and cover it with the 2 stops of ND filter, you're gonna have more highlights protection. So you will be able to control the highlights and they will not explode on the back when you're shooting something like that when the sun is coming out suddenly. So this one is a really cool thing to have in this kind of cameras. So guys, this is it. I hope you like this kind of information. Make sure you subscribe and see you in the next one.